Was the live-action Lion King good enough to warrant a sequel? No. I'm just kidding. Well, no, but there's more to it than that. Look, I know that I'm late on this, and I know that everybody else has seen this already, but I hadn't. And with the sequel coming out, I figured that it would be a good chance to relook at it and decide if it was good enough to warrant a sequel. And honestly, I went in with pretty low expectations. And I'm not going to say that it blew me away, because there was a lot of weaknesses, but there were parts of it that were not terrible. I think it's because it just ended up being We Can't Disappoint Beyonce, the musical. Live action Lion King is a bit of a misnomer because both of them are animated. I guess photorealistic Lion King is more accurate, but nobody was asking for this. It was sort of one of the first of that nostalgia bait wave that started in about 2019. I am sure I am not the first to say this, but the issue with taking Lion King and making it live action versus Aladdin or Cinderella or The Little Mermaid is that it's only animals. This should be obvious, but it's literally only animals. And trying to play within the bounds of what is realistic robs you of a lot of acting performance capability in that story. It's so hard to convey emotions on screen, show don't tell, when you are working with a very blunt medium, i.e. an actual animal's face. You kind of paint yourself into a corner because your characters can't necessarily emote as fully on the acting spectrum as, say, in an animated situation, the original situation. I'm just gonna say live action and animated. You guys get it. Just give me this one. You understand. Don't be pedantic, okay? That's my job. It's hard. And that's the whole point of animation. And maybe I'm a victim of nostalgia because it came out when I was a kid, so obviously I'm gonna be looking through more forgiving goggles. But sincerely, I don't understand how we haven't gotten a live-action Atlantis or a live-action Hercules before we got the live-action Lion King. Because nobody was asking for it. That being said, in foreign markets especially, this movie did numbers. I think it's the number one animated film of all time in a majority of the world. Yes, the live-action one, right? Weird. So, was it worth the hype? No. Well, basically no. I hesitate to fully say no with my chest because there were redeeming qualities about this and I don't think it whiffed as hard as it could have, but let's dive into it. And does it really do good to compare them? I mean, nobody's gonna sit down and watch them one next to another, scene by scene by scene, right? Wrong, because that's exactly what I did, thank you. As in, I literally put both of them up, watched a scene of the live action one, watched a scene of the animated one, went back to rewatch the live action one. Because I'm committed to making content for you, so like and subscribe, pretty please. And not that I recommend it necessarily, it was kind of time consuming, but it was a very interesting practice to see what was literally copy pasted from the original to the new one, and what was more just sort of rhythmically an echo of it. With that being said, let's dive into some of the differences between this movie and the last one, and let's talk about what a sequel might hold too. Originally, I kind of went into this, I expected, honestly, the full movie to be a shot-for-shot remake, which it kind of was. Not totally, but it's like a 78% shot-for-shot remake. And I was ready to clown on that, but in retrospect, the places where they chose to make it shot-for-shot, I get why they did it. Circle of Life, they specifically made shot-for-shot because it was an attempt to knit together the previous animated version with this new art style. Basically, showing the audience, this is what you're used to, and this is the new way that we're telling it, okay? Everybody get on board. This is what you can expect. So I kind of don't mind that Circle of Life is the same. That's an interesting aspect of this nostalgia bait trend, is you aren't necessarily recreating something that you have recreated before. Instead, you are recreating what people remember. Do you get what I'm saying? It's similar but slightly different. You're fighting to recreate people's nostalgia. You're not necessarily fighting to recreate the thing that you already own. Does that make sense? Granted, you kind of have to try to keep the soul of the original, and that's tricky. Especially if you don't have actors on screen. This was hard. This was a hard thing to do. And I think they were only able to do it through the grace of God and Beyonce. Now, granted, the bar for a sequel to a Disney movie is pretty low. They make sequels out of everything these days. But I think that Lion King was one of the original sequels. Rescuers Down Under, which came out in 1990, to Aladdin's, Return of Jafar and King of Thieves. than it was Lion King 2. So one of the first 4 times that Disney decided to revisit the well as opposed to coming up with something new. It's sort of begun that era. Anyway, this movie makes use of a tactic that Disney has been pulling for a couple of years now, which is garner views and engagement and excitement about a movie built on the backs of the popularity of the cast. You see this in Moana with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, with Stephanie Beatrice in Encanto, and Chris Pine in Wish. But of course, the idea of using a celebrity to win goodwill with the public is not new, and they're far from the only people who do it. I mean, check out my video about the Super Bowl this year. The celebrity glazing was rampant, and I think that is by design, because like I said, live action Lion King is a hard sell. So you need as many recognizable names as you possibly can. And if you have Beyonce, you need to include Beyonce. Literally, I think this is the most star-studded cast I have ever seen in a Disney movie. Chance the Rapper had like a cameo that was 2 lines long. They were pulling out all the stops. Also makes sense that they employed a majority black cast for this movie set in Africa. I think it was around the same time that Black Panther was happening, so very much so there was an energy behind wanting to include people of color in cast. Anti-whitewashing, if you will. And you know what? I think it's effective. If Beyonce can't help you sell tickets, then literally you are doomed from the start. That being said, without the celebrity cast, I think that this movie would have been a flop. Why do I say that? The live action employed 2 things really, really well. They employed the power of people's memory of the movie and its celebrity star-studded cast, and that kept it from having to be as excellent as a movie as we've come to expect from Disney. They benefited a lot from nostalgia and popularity. They didn't have to work as hard skill-wise to bring it to life in a fun and juicy way. And despite the celebrity, I don't think that they did it very successfully. I mean, like I said, literally watching back-to-back both movies. I watched the live action of Simba's dad dying, and then I watched the animated version, and the animated version still made me cry, even though the music, the swells, everything was the exact same as I had just seen literal seconds before, and it still hit me hard enough to make me want to cry. I'm literally crying. It's just so... Oh, it's so well acted.
Dad?
Oh,
We gotta go home.
oh my god. This live action thing could never... Come on. Cowards. Cowardly lions. And I don't think that that's only nostalgia. I think that the performance in that critical moment was lacking, but it was okay because you were using what people remembered, not what they were seeing on screen. Crazy. Another difference between the live action and the animated is that the script was longer. Often in scenes, there was like 25% more dialogue. There's this thing with writing that you almost always want to be shorter and more concise. So I don't necessarily think that it beefed up the script to add more lines to say the same thing. Along with the lengthening of the script, there were some different acting choices that intentionally took it out of little kid realm. There's this 90s brand of kidism that is so on display in Lion King. That was a very common theme at the time. But we don't really see that on display in the 2019 version. For example, they cut almost all of the like cartoon physics, Acme, Looney Tunes moments that the original had. It's heightened for a slightly older audience. Some of the acting performances are almost closer to what you would expect from Game of Thrones than Lion King. Scar especially.
How weird is that?
You've no idea.
Jon Favreau described the actor as almost Shakespearean, which I would agree with. He is very thoughtful, internal, and conflicted than the melodramatic, sassy Scar we got in the original. But that being said, I think that there's some of the cuts that overall made the script way weaker, especially because some of those moments did so much to illustrate Simba's character before he has this tragic event happen to him. There's a moment towards the beginning of the animated version where Zazu is kidnapped by the hyenas, and we specifically see Simba and Nala go back to try and save Zazu right after they had escaped the clutches of death. And I see why this moment was cut, because the sequence of events is that eventually Zazu gets turned into like a firework, and very, like I said, very Looney Tunes. And so because of the zaniness, they opt to not have that moment in the live action. However, that moment was kind of the only moment that we see in the original film that characterizes Simba as someone brave and someone who is worthy of stepping into the position of king. And it's silly and it's short, but it's the only moment that we see Simba looking like his father and making choices like Mufasa would. And so, to completely cut that, we don't see why Simba deserves to have the throne. We see his childlike innocence, but we don't see that nobility or that potential for mobility that we do in the original. And it's so good. It's so concise and specific and does so many things. It's just a really well done script. There's just some artistry and symbolism that was really lost in the translation of this film. Visually, it just becomes very monotonous. It's all the same color palette. It's not very interesting to keep your attention. Other artful moments that I regret that we are missing, like the introduction of Scar as a character. The first thing that we see is Scar's claws coming into frame to destroy something innocent. Like, how delicious and to the point is that introduction as a character? Versus in the live action, we ease into it and it takes too much time and it's deep and it's thoughtful, but I don't really want to be on Scar's side. I don't really want to empathize with him. I want him to only be snatching innocence away from my main character. They humanized Scar too much. I didn't like it. Another thing about the carefree 90s kid characterism of the original is that that's part of what makes that moment where Mufasa dies hit that much harder. That moment where we zoom in on Simba's face, that is the shattering of Simba's innocence. And so when we don't have that basis of fun and joy and zaniness, that moment doesn't hit as hard for the live action. The thing with stories, even with like really dark dramas, is you need to have those moments of levity, of fun. You need to have those highs so that your lows can be even lower. If you just stay mid, if you just say medium silly, medium fun, medium joyful, then when you get really sad, it's not nearly as dramatic as when you are especially silly down to especially sad. And this difference is what make people sob at a scene that they have seen dozens of times. This difference? Nothing. I feel nothing. I feel no emotional attachment to this lion. There are some people who probably feel a little too much emotional attachment to the lion, but I'm not going to get into that. That's all for them. And for the record, I'm not here to complain about the things that a certain section of the internet might be here to complain about. Also, come on, Disney. How come I don't want to make out with any of these characters? Come on. No, I am genuinely here to offer a critique. Another thing this movie does is fill plot holes that nobody is asking about, especially because it just gums up the pacing. In really heightened emotional moments, you have to stop to be like, well, why does da-da-da-da-da, and like satisfy the CinemaSins people, which is boring. Literally at the climax where Scar is about to start fighting the lions, there's this question where Scar is talking to Simba about recognizing this moment from before as Simba is about to fall off of Pride Rock, and he says, I remember the look in his eyes, and then he whispers, I killed Mufasa. And then Simba confronts him, and it's leading up, it's hitting this boiling point. There's these two entities that are about to crash, and they pause and take a moment for Sarabi to say, wait, we thought you said you didn't get to the gorge in time. Then how did you know the look in Mufasa's eyes? It's wordy, it's clunky, it completely derails this, and like the energy is just like not there. And not for nothing, nobody would have been like, oh well, why is he attacking them? It was an unnecessary ad, and I don't think it improved on the original.
You know, in bad movies, when they show like a character driving in the car in order to get to the next scene, that is what they're doing with this movie, is like answering like, what is the car that got us here? And the audience was not worried about that. Edit that out and just like start where things start.
Other additions to this movie that were interesting, there was sort of an updated morality imposed onto this movie as well. And I'm not just talking about like not depicting Rafiki as a spooky shaman and kind of a cartoonishly African character, his differences in his culture is being played for laughs, or like Timon saying, well, what do you want us to do? Dress and drag and do the hula? I'm not just saying wokeness or like sensitivity culture part of it.
Probably a good call to cut out the class warfare scene where he's terrorizing his underlings.
There's also employment of more therapy speak, specifically when Mufasa comes back to visit Simba, like in the sky. His message is so much less about expectations and pressure and responsibility and much more, I love you as my son, which is an interesting change in heart, I think. Like generationally, a shift from the onus of responsibility from like an individual to society to an individual's care for themselves. Does that make sense? Instead of focusing on what should be done for the greater good of society, it's focusing on how to love and care for the individual themselves. What do I mean? So literally, when Mufasa comes back in the first one, his message is pretty much remember who you are, and one of like not being impressed with what Simba has been doing since his passing. Versus this new one, he literally says, the thing I am most proud of is having you as my son, which is sweet. Like if you could hear your parent who's passed away say one more thing to you, what would you want it to be? And it's perfect. It's the thing I'm most proud of is having you as my son. And I do like that. But story-wise, I don't know how effective of a choice that is. Because then what it boils down to is Simba having this aha moment of, I am me, I am who I am. But then why does he go back to Pride Rock? Because again, we don't have the moment that we saw who Simba could potentially be in the future in this movie. We don't have the external pressure from his dad and like the expectations of this is your duty as a king. All we have is like Simba basically going on like a spiritual retreat to find himself, and like for some reason that means that he comes back. It just falls flat. It doesn't track as a motivator. The only reason that the story goes the way it does is because that's what it did in the first one, and that's what people remember, and that's what people expect. On its own, standing alone, the live action Lion King, the motivations don't make sense. Because you could just as easily say that Simba went on his spirituality retreat and decided, yeah, I am who I am. I am a lion who eats grubs with a warthog and a meerkat, and this is what I'm supposed to be. Yeah, the therapy speak is interesting. It's more emotionally intelligent, I guess, but story-wise, I think that leans more towards enabling someone in their lack of momentum than getting the ball rolling. Does that make sense? It doesn't matter what you do. I'm still proud of you as my son. Sit around and eat bugs. It's okay. What? There's also a scene that we get where Timon and Pumbaa, specifically they question like the idea of a circle of life. And they sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. They're like, oh, if it was a circle, then that means that it would be our responsibility to help everyone else. But using an ironic approach for a moral of a story is weak, in my opinion. Why is everyone afraid of sincerity? Just do it. Do the thing on purpose. Another choice that I am intrigued by is that they opted to not give Rafiki his staff for a majority of the film, until the very end moment. And I have some theories about this. One, I think they realized when they were animating the end sequence that they needed that levity moment. Remember what I said about the comedic versus serious moments? I think there's this moment where Rafiki goes like full kung fu at the very end, that he does so only through using his staff. So I think they had to literally include a moment where he pulls out the staff and goes, hello, old friend. And not for nothing, I wouldn't be surprised if they already knew that they were going to be making a prequel, and they already knew that Rafiki was going to be using his staff in that one, so they opted to include it in this one. And there's a couple of other moments that I think indicate that they knew they were going to be making a prequel. Scar, in his beginning monologue where he's talking to Mufasa, says something along the lines of, oh, I would never dream of challenging you again.
Wouldn't dream of challenging you again.
I think Disney knew they were going to be revisiting this well, so they kind of had to wade through so that they could make Mufasa. Live action Mufasa was always the end goal. You heard it here first, folks. And you can see that they were sort of trying to find their own sort of brand of that silliness. One tactic that they use is Billy Eichner as Timon and Seth Rogen as Pumbaa. Apparently Jon Favreau had them improvise a lot of the script after running it a couple times, and a lot of that improv made it in. Want to change my name to what, Brad? It's good. But again, not trying to mimic the exact thing that was done before, but sort of make it their own. I don't think that Billy Eichner and Seth Rogen have quite contrasting enough energies to be as good as the original pair, but I still think that they were fun, and I think that they delivered on what they needed. Hakuna Matata, I think they nailed. I think they nailed Hakuna Matata as a song, as a set piece. It was different, but still hit the same notes, and there's some in-jokes that are really fun. There's some of that cartooniness that is very much so lacking in the rest of the film, and listening to Eichner's and Seth Rogen's ad-libs is also enjoyable. It's the expectation and misdirection that it makes it really fun. And I got downhearted every time that I farted. Are you going to stop me? No, I am not. And I despise you. Fun. Because the first one was a breaking of the fourth wall that was unexpected. But this time it was a breaking of a fourth wall that we also didn't expect. See, that's what I mean. They're not doing the exact same thing, but they are rhythmically mimicking it. However, that is not true with the entire script. A lot of their attempts at that levity, at that fun, are not successful. There's a moment right before Rafiki discovers that Simba is alive where he catches some of his hair. In the original, it just kind of floats to him on the wind. In this one, we watch the hair go through kind of the circle of life, which thematically I can get behind, but in practice, means that we watch it float down a river, then land on a tree, get eaten up by a giraffe, and then get pooped out. Literally, we have a dung beetle rolling some giraffe manure, and that is their kind of attempt at levity. And I literally think that that dung beetle was not originally supposed to be a part of that sequence, because you could completely cut it out and you see the camera move from the tree it was originally on down to the next player in this relay race, which is the ants. So I think they literally tried to put it in, and I kind of get it without that silly moment of like, oh my gosh, it's poop on screen. It is sort of just one note, and you kind of need that silliness. I will say there is a documentary also on Disney Plus that apparently accompanied the publishing of this movie. Apparently it's narrated by that dung beetle. So I think they added that in after the fact, but I can't tell if that's because they wanted to tie it into the other IP that they were about to be releasing, or because they needed something funny there. I don't like it. I'm sorry. I did not like it when Rafiki goes and he picks up the poop. It's grody to me. That being said, this movie's biggest saving grace, full stop, is Beyonce. She absolutely sells this movie. She wrote an original song that they included. They added more scenes so that Nala, her character, has more chances to shine. And not for nothing, even the animation of Nala is more nuanced and better than any other character on screen. Like, literally, her character was more expressive than any of the other animals. And I don't know necessarily if the extra Nala scenes made the story stronger or better, but Nala's character is the strongest part of the live action one. It really feels like these creators were like, if we have Beyonce involved, we cannot make her look bad. So her acting, we're going to make sure that it is phenomenal. We're going to let her sing, and of course she's going to kill it. Like I said, she is doing a majority of the legwork to make this movie palatable. And let's see if that works for a second time around. So what can we look forward to in Mufasa? Honestly, kind of a combo of Lion King 2 and Lion King 1.5. Based off of the promotional materials, there are some characters that we're going to be revisiting, i.e. Simba and Nala's daughter, Kiara, voiced by Blue Ivy, no less. Rafiki telling stories about Mufasa, while Timon and Pumbaa narrate. But it doesn't seem like there's a Kovu, so bad news for all of you who that was your first bad boy crush. You know who I'm talking about. You know. If you like bearded emo boys now, I guarantee that Lion King 2 was one of your childhood comfort movies. Independent, without a worry or a care. Gosh, it slaps. I'm gonna have to revisit Mufasa and Lion King 2 when it comes out. But I'll be intrigued how they maintain any of the drama, because one of the elements that this movie can't have is any mortal peril for any of these animals, i.e. none of them can die, so how dramatic can the situations get? We don't have a Kovu, so we know that this happens kind of early on in Kiara's life. And Mufasa, we know that he lives because we know that he's Simba's dad. And how are they going to defeat enemies like Scar? Because they can't kill him, they have to be alive for the events of the first movie. It's another really hard challenge. It'll also be interesting to see if this is a new story, how well they can execute the emotional performances that's needed when they don't have the nostalgia factor to help them out. I hope that the animation has gotten better in the past 5 years, and that they can employ some of the effort that they put into making Beyonce's character perform as well as they could. They can deliver the performances needed to tell a new story. I'm not confident that they will. Although, it also looks like this Lion King has a little bit more zaniness to it. We have Rafiki holding the staff. We have animals dancing in a circle, which we did not have in the live action one. So, sort of similarly to Star Wars, I'm guessing that tonally there's going to be a slight shift, even though there's the same characters because of the new director. And I think that they've got enough of these remakes and reimaginings to know what kind of works and what doesn't. So, anyway, that's all my thoughts on that. Would I recommend watching both of these movies back to back? Maybe for educational purposes, but definitely not the best way to enjoy those films, because you're just going to get disappointed. I guess I will have to revisit this when the sequel comes out, and we'll see how that lands. Anyway, thanks for watching, gang. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Feel free to check out a couple of my other videos. In the meantime, Philly, have a good day. I love you. Bye.